Love has a way of coloring our memories, doesn't it? When I think back to the early days with Emily, everything seemed like a dream. She was the kind of woman who could light up a room, not just with her looks, but with her laugh, the kind that made you feel lucky just to hear it. We married young, full of passion and plans for the future. I never doubted her love for me. Not then. For years, I thought we were building something solid. Every anniversary dinner, every lazy Sunday morning, every small joke that only we understood, they were bricks in the foundation of a life I thought was unshakable. But looking back now, I see the cracks I missed. Tiny, hairline fractures spreading slowly until one day, everything came crashing down. It started innocuously, as these things do. Emily had begun staying out later than usual, claiming she was helping with extra shifts at work. "They're short-staffed," she said with that disarming smile. "It's only temporary." I believed her, of course. Why wouldn't I? Trust was the cornerstone of our relationship, or so I thought. Still, I couldn't ignore the creeping unease. Late at night, when I was alone with my thoughts, a voice in the back of my mind whispered doubts. I told myself I was being paranoid. Emily loved me. We were happy. Weren't we? Then came the night my best friend, Jason, asked to meet up. I could tell from his voice that something was wrong, but nothing could have prepared me for what he said. "There's something you need to know about Emily," he began, carefully. My heart stopped for a beat. Jason had always been protective of me, like a brother, but I could see the conflict in his eyes now. "You're not going to like this," he added. "What is it?" I managed, my stomach already twisting into knots. Jason hesitated, then leaned in closer. "She's been seeing other men." I didn't want to believe it at first, but "I've seen her." The words hit me like a freight train. My first instinct was denial. "No," I said firmly. "You must be mistaken." Jason shook his head. "I wish I were. I thought about not telling you, but you deserve to know the truth. I even have proof." And with that, he handed me his phone. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the photos, grainy, but unmistakable. Emily, smiling coyly at a man I didn't recognize, her hand brushing his in a way that wasn't innocent. Jason's photos wouldn't leave my mind. The grainy images played on a loop, haunting me with their implications. I didn't say much to him after he showed them to me, just nodded stiffly and muttered something about needing time to think. By the time I got home, it felt like my chest was caving in. Emily was already in bed when I walked in, her phone propped on the nightstand. She looked up at me, her eyes warm and familiar, and asked, "Late night with Jason?" I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah. Just catching up." She didn't seem to notice the strain in my voice, or if she did, she didn't let on. I stood there for a moment, watching her settle back into the pillows, and wondered how someone could seem so calm, so normal, while carrying on a betrayal like this. I almost confronted her then and there, but something held me back, a need to know more, to be absolutely sure. Over the next few days, I became an actor in my own life. I played the role of the loving husband, the clueless fool, while inside, I was unraveling. Emily went about her routines as if nothing was wrong, while I studied her every move. Were her smiles more distant? Was she texting more than usual? Were her work shifts really just cover for something else? The answers came sooner than I expected. One evening, Emily announced she'd be working late again. I tried to sound casual as I asked, "Which hospital is it this time?" "The one downtown," she replied, not missing a beat. "Bethesda General." I nodded as if I believed her. But as soon as she walked out the door, I grabbed my keys and followed. I kept my distance, my heart pounding with each turn she took, until her car finally pulled into the lot of a seedy motel on the outskirts of town. My stomach dropped. I watched from the safety of my car as a man, tall, with dark hair, approached her. They exchanged a quick kiss before disappearing inside together. For a long moment, I sat frozen, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. This was it. Proof. But what was I supposed to do with it? Storm into the motel? Scream at them in the lobby? I felt paralyzed, torn between rage and heartbreak, humiliation and disbelief. Instead, I drove away, my mind racing. That night, I barely slept. Emily came home after midnight, her cheeks flushed and her breath smelling faintly of alcohol. "You're still up?" she asked, sounding surprised. "Yeah," I said hoarsely. "Just couldn't sleep." She leaned in and kissed my cheek, the gesture so casual, so routine, it made my skin crawl. "Go to bed," she murmured. "You look exhausted." I watched her climb into bed, watched her drift off as if nothing had happened, and for the first time in our marriage, I felt like I didn't recognize the person lying next to me. The next morning, the house was quiet, and Emily was still asleep. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee, trying to sort through the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Anger. Hurt. Confusion. But above all, determination. If I was going to confront her, I needed more than Jason's photos or my own suspicions. I needed irrefutable proof. Emily's phone was charging on the counter, unattended. I hesitated, feeling a twinge of guilt. But then I thought about the man from the motel, the way they'd kissed, and my resolve hardened. I unlocked her phone, she'd never bothered to change the password, and started scrolling. Her texts were clean, almost suspiciously so. There were no incriminating messages, no calls to unfamiliar numbers. But then I checked her photo gallery, and my breath caught. Buried among pictures of us, family gatherings, and her work colleagues were selfies I hadn't seen before. Pictures of her in lingerie, some of them so intimate that my stomach turned. They'd been sent to someone, but to who? I switched to her email, but just like the texts, there was nothing obvious. That's when I noticed an app one didn't recognize, a messaging platform with an innocuous name. When I opened it, everything clicked. There were messages from multiple men, and some of them made my skin crawl. Explicit plans, shared photos, and inside jokes that painted a picture of a side of Emily I'd never known. But one thread stood out. A man named Ryan had been messaging her almost daily, and their exchanges were more than flirtatious, they were coordinated. They mentioned meeting at the motel. Discussed timing around my work schedule. The betrayal felt calculated, surgical. I took screenshots of everything and sent them to my email. I didn't stop there. Over the next few days, I started keeping my own records. I noted her comings and goings, her excuses, the gaps in her schedule. I even checked our shared bank account and found small, unexplained withdrawals. I wasn't sure what they were for, but they didn't sit right. Meanwhile, Emily seemed completely unaware of my investigation. She went about her days with the same breezy confidence, laughing at my jokes, texting on her phone, kissing me goodnight. It made my blood boil to watch her pretend, to know she was looking me in the eye while hiding so much. One evening, Jason called to check in. "Have you talked to her yet?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. "I need more." "More?" "Matt, you've got all the proof you need. What are you waiting for?" He was right. I had the evidence. But this wasn't just about confronting Emily anymore. It was about something deeper, something I didn't want to admit yet. I wasn't just gathering evidence to expose her lies, I was building a case for what came next. I knew I couldn't carry on like this much longer. The lies, the pretense, it was suffocating. But every time I imagined confronting Emily, my mind spiraled into chaos. What would I say? What would she say? Would she deny it, or worse, turn the blame on me? I needed to be ready for any scenario. I spent the next day finalizing my plan. First, I compiled all the evidence, the photos Jason had taken, the screenshots of her messages, the details of her meetups with Ryan. I printed everything and tucked it into a folder that I hid in the bottom drawer of my desk. Then, I reached out to a divorce lawyer Jason had recommended. "This is one of the worst parts," she said over the phone. "But it's also the most important. You need to stay calm. Don't let anger cloud your judgment, or she'll use it against you." Her words stuck with me. As much as I wanted to unleash all the hurt and betrayal I felt, I knew I couldn't afford to lose control. Emily was good at spinning things in her favor. I'd seen it before, how she could turn any argument into a way to make herself the victim. I wasn't going to let her do that this time. That evening, I waited until Emily had poured herself a glass of wine and settled on the couch with her laptop. She was scrolling through social media, humming softly to herself, completely at ease. My chest tightened. How could she act so normal when everything was falling apart? "Emily," I said, my voice steady but firm. "We need to talk." She looked up, surprised. "Sure, what's up?" I took a deep breath, my hands tightening into fists at my sides. "I know." Her brow furrowed. "You know what? About you and Ryan. And the others." I let the words hang in the air, watching her expression shift from confusion to shock, then something colder, calculation. She set her laptop aside and crossed her arms. "I don't know what you're talking about." My jaw clenched. Of course, she'd deny it. "Don't do that, Emily. Don't insult me by pretending you don't know what I mean. Matt, you're being paranoid." Her voice was calm, but her eyes darted away, searching for a way out of the conversation. "If this is about me working late." "It's not about that," I interrupted, my voice rising despite myself. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, opening the folder of screenshots. "It's about these." Her face went pale as she stared at the screen. I flipped through the messages, the photos, and the damning evidence of her lies. For a moment, she said nothing, just sat there with her mouth slightly open. Then, as if flipping a switch, she laughed, a bitter, mocking sound. "So what?" she said, her tone sharp. "You've been snooping through my phone. Invading my privacy. That's rich, Matt. Real rich." I couldn't believe it. Even now, she was trying to turn the tables on me. "Are you serious?" I snapped. "That's your defense? That I invaded your privacy? What about the fact that you've been cheating on me for God knows how long?" She stood, her glass of wine trembling in her hand. "It's not that simple," she said, her voice cracking. "You don't understand what it's like to feel so, trapped. So suffocated." "Suffocated?" I repeated, my voice shaking with disbelief. "You've been lying to me for months, maybe years, and you're going to tell me you're the one who feels suffocated?" Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't feel sorry for her. "Not anymore. Matt, I never meant to hurt you," she said softly. I didn't know how to tell you." "Tell me what?" I demanded. "That our marriage was a lie. That I was never enough for you. You could have told me that years ago and saved us both a lot of pain." Her silence said everything. She had nothing left to say, no excuses that would make this better. And as I stood there, staring at the woman I thought I knew, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. After the confrontation, Emily retreated to the bedroom without another word. I stayed in the living room, staring at the now empty space where she had been. My mind replayed her feeble excuses, her attempt to turn this back on me. The anger I thought had faded surged again, but this time it felt different, calmer, more focused. I grabbed my phone and texted Jason. "It's done. She knows I know." His reply came almost instantly. "How'd it go?" "Exactly like you said it would. Denial, excuses, tears. She didn't even try to own it. Jason responded with a simple, "I'm sorry, man. Let me know if you need anything." What I needed was clarity. Answers. But Emily had made it clear I wasn't going to get them from her. I spent that night on the couch, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Sleep never came. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Emily moving around the house. It was almost jarring, how normal she seemed, brewing coffee, checking her phone, even humming under her breath. For a moment, I thought I had imagined the confrontation, but then she glanced at me. Her face was blank, her expression carefully guarded. "Morning," she said, her voice unnervingly cheerful. "Do you want coffee?" I didn't reply. I couldn't. Instead, I got up, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door. I needed space. Air. A chance to think. I drove aimlessly for hours, winding through back roads and empty streets. My thoughts kept circling back to one thing: how did it come to this? How did we go from being the couple everyone envied to this? Was there a moment I missed, a turning point where everything started falling apart? I ended up at Jason's house. He opened the door, took one look at me, and stepped aside. "Come in." We sat in his kitchen, nursing beers even though it was barely noon. "You're handling this better than I thought you would," Jason said eventually. I laughed bitterly. "Am I? Because it sure doesn't feel that way." "At least you didn't lose it," he pointed out. "You stayed calm. That's more than I can say for most guys in your shoes." "Yeah, well, staying calm doesn't change anything." I stared at the bottle in my hands, the condensation dripping onto the table. "What am I supposed to do now, Jason? Just pretend this never happened?" He shook his head. "You've already done the hard part. Now you focus on what's next. You've got the evidence. You've got a lawyer. Don't let her manipulate you into thinking this is your fault." Deep down, I knew he was right. But knowing and accepting are two very different things. When I finally returned home that evening, Emily was waiting for me. She stood in the kitchen, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk," she said. "I don't think we have anything left to talk about," I replied, my voice flat. "Matt, please," she said, her tone softening. "I know I've hurt you, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, start over, whatever it takes." I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed through the room. "Counseling? You think counseling is going to fix this? Emily, you didn't just betray me, you planned it. You lied to me, over and over. That's not something you come back from." Tears welled in her eyes again, but I didn't feel the same sting of pity as before. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "A terrible mistake. But I still love you." Her words hung in the air, hollow and meaningless. "No, you don't," I said quietly. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this." She opened her mouth to argue but closed it again, defeated. For the first time, she looked as broken as I felt. But instead of softening me, it only made me more resolute. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I said. "We're done, Emily. You need to accept that." Her face crumpled, and she sank into a chair, her head in her hands. I walked away, leaving her alone in the kitchen. The sound of her quiet sobs followed me down the hall, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The days that followed were a blur. Emily stayed in the house, moving around like a shadow of herself. We spoke only when necessary, polite exchanges about mail, groceries, or mundane household tasks. I kept my distance, spending hours at work or driving aimlessly just to avoid being near her. One afternoon, as I sorted through some papers in my office, my phone buzzed. It was an email from my lawyer. She'd set up a preliminary meeting for us to discuss next steps. "I'll need a list of assets," she wrote. "Property, accounts, vehicles, anything joint. The clearer the picture we have, the smoother this will go. I sighed, staring at the words. Smooth wasn't the word I'd use to describe any of this. Emily's voice interrupted my thoughts. Matt, can we talk for a second? She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, looking more composed than I'd seen her in days. What do you want, Emily? I asked, not looking up from my papers. She hesitated. I need to know what happens now. Are we really doing this? Yes, I said simply. She stepped into the room, her expression shifting from pleading to defensive. Don't you think we should at least try? I know I messed up, but we've been together for so long. You're really going to throw all of that away? I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You threw it away, Emily. Not me. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. She looked like she wanted to argue, but instead, she folded her arms tightly across her chest. Fine, she said, her voice clipped. If that's how you feel, then I guess there's nothing left to say. She left the room, slamming the door behind her. I sat there for a long time, staring at the papers on my desk without really seeing them. That evening, I called Jason. I'm thinking of moving out, I told him. You sure about that? He asked. She's still in the house, I explained. Every time I see her, it's like ripping the wound open again. I need space. Jason was quiet for a moment. All right, he said finally. If that's what you need, do it. But don't let her think you're giving up ground. Make it clear this is temporary. I agreed, but deep down, I wasn't sure it was temporary. I just knew I couldn't keep living under the same roof as her. The next day, I packed a bag and left. I didn't tell her where I was going, and she didn't ask. Jason let me crash on his couch, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of relief. That night, as I lay staring at the ceiling, I thought about everything that had happened. Emily's betrayal had shattered my life, but it wasn't just the infidelity that hurt. It was the deception, the years of lies that had made me question everything I thought I knew about her, and about myself. For the first time, I started to wonder if this wasn't just the end of our marriage, but the start of something else. Something better. Living at Jason's felt surreal, like I was hovering between my old life and whatever came next. His couch became my makeshift bed, his fridge my source of meals, but the quiet nights there were what I appreciated most. It gave me space to think, to breathe, and to process the fallout of Emily's betrayal. 2 weeks passed before I heard from her again. I was halfway through sorting the mountain of paperwork my lawyer needed when her name flashed on my phone screen. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the answer button. Finally, I picked up. Matt, she began, her voice quieter than I'd expected. I need to know where we stand. I leaned back against Jason's kitchen counter, staring out the window. What do you mean? I mean, she hesitated, then sighed heavily. Are we really going through with this? The divorce? Yes, I said firmly. There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. Do you still love me? I closed my eyes, the weight of her question pressing down on me. Did I? Or had her betrayal killed that part of me? After everything, it was hard to tell where love ended and anger began. It doesn't matter, I said finally. Love isn't enough to fix this, Emily. Not after what you've done. Her sharp intake of breath made me wince, but I didn't back down. You made your choices. Now I'm making mine. She didn't respond, and after a few moments, I ended the call. I stared at the phone in my hand, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. It was the first time I'd truly closed the door on her, and it felt final. The next morning, Jason handed me a cup of coffee and gave me a long look. You look like you barely slept. I didn't, I admitted. Emily called last night. What did she say? Asked if I still loved her. Jason raised an eyebrow. And I told her it doesn't matter anymore. He nodded slowly, taking a sip of his coffee. Good. She needs to understand that this isn't something she can talk her way out of. The rest of the day passed in a haze of errands and phone calls, but just as I was settling in for the evening, something happened that changed everything. My phone buzzed with a notification, an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "Thought you should see this." Curious, I opened it. Inside was a single video file. My heart sank as I clicked play. The footage was grainy, clearly taken from a hidden camera, but the scene it captured was unmistakable. Emily, sitting in a dimly lit room, talking to Ryan. Their voices were muffled, but their body language spoke volumes. They were leaning toward each other, their expressions serious. Then came the part that stopped my heart. Emily turned to him, her voice suddenly clear. "Matt can never find out. If he does, we're screwed." Ryan leaned back, smirking. "Relax. He's too trusting to put the pieces together. And even if he does, we'll handle it." The video ended there, leaving me reeling. Who had sent this? And how did they get it? I forwarded the email to my lawyer immediately, then sat back, staring at my screen. This wasn't just betrayal, it was conspiracy. The video looped in my mind all night. Emily's words weren't just careless, they were calculated. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry she got caught. The next morning, my lawyer called. "The video is damning," she said. "If we can verify its authenticity, this changes everything." "Who sent it?" "I have no idea," I admitted. "But I'll find out." I emailed the sender, asking who they were and how they got the footage. Hours passed with no response. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it Ryan's other scorned lover? A stranger with an agenda? Someone who wanted revenge? Meanwhile, Emily texted me. "Can we meet to talk? Just us." I stared at the screen, conflicted. Part of me wanted to confront her with the video, to see her reaction. But the smarter part of me knew better. If I played my cards right, I could use this to finalize everything on my terms. My response was brief. "I'll let my lawyer handle it." She replied almost immediately. "You don't have to do this, Matt. Please." But it was already done. The day after Emily's text, I got the reply I'd been waiting for. The sender of the video finally wrote back. "I thought you deserved to know the truth. I live in the same building where Emily and Ryan met. They weren't discreet. I caught them on my security camera several times and got fed up. If you need more, let me know." More? I couldn't believe it. There was more. I thanked them and asked for anything else they had. Hours later, another email arrived, this time with several attachments, additional videos of Emily and Ryan meeting at the apartment and leaving together, laughing, kissing, oblivious to the camera capturing it all. It was more than I'd ever expected. The evidence was overwhelming, and I forwarded everything to my lawyer. Her response was quick. "This solidifies your case. We'll push for a clean divorce with no spousal support. If she resists, we'll use the footage." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of control returning. Emily had been playing a game, but now I held the winning hand. That evening, Jason and I sat in his garage, drinking beers as I filled him in. "She has no idea what's coming," I said, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Jason shook his head. "She doesn't deserve your sympathy, Matt. Not after what she's done." "I know," I admitted. "But it's not just her. It's everything, our life, the plans we had. It's like none of it meant anything." "Doesn't mean it didn't," Jason said quietly. "You gave her everything, and she threw it away. That's on her, not you." I nodded, but the ache in my chest didn't ease. The next day, Emily called. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Her voice was trembling, and I could tell she'd been crying. "Matt, please, can we just talk? One last time." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe that afternoon, and for the first time since the confrontation, she looked genuinely remorseful. "I know I've ruined everything," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. "I don't even know why I did it. I don't know, bored, selfish, stupid. Do you even love me?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "Yes," she whispered. "I always have. I lost sight of what mattered." I wanted to believe her, but the weight of the evidence, and her choices, crushed any hope I had left. "You didn't just hurt me, Emily," I said. "You destroyed everything we built. And you didn't care until you got caught." Her tears spilled over, but I felt no urge to comfort her. "What happens now?" she asked softly. I stood, leaving enough cash on the table to cover our drinks. "Now, we finish this. And we move on." I walked out, her sobs fading behind me, and for the first time, I didn't look back. The day the divorce papers were finalized, I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. It wasn't the celebration I thought it might be. There were no grand moments of triumph, just the quiet realization that a chapter of my life had closed. Emily didn't fight the terms. Whether it was guilt, exhaustion, or the overwhelming evidence, she signed without protest. My lawyer sent a brief message. "It's done. You're free. Free." The word echoed in my mind as I sat alone in my car, staring at the courthouse steps. For so long, my life had revolved around Emily, her needs, her mistakes, her lies. Now, for the first time in years, I could focus on myself. Jason invited me over that evening to mark the occasion. He handed me a beer, clinking his bottle against mine. "To new beginnings," he said. "New beginnings," I echoed, though it felt hollow. The weeks that followed were slow and unsteady. I threw myself into work, spent more time at the gym, and even joined Jason on a few hiking trips. But no matter how busy I stayed, the silence of my new life felt deafening. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from the neighbor who had sent me the videos. "Thought you might want to know," they said. "Ryan's been gone for weeks. Haven't seen him since your divorce went through." "Gone?" I asked, confused. "Yeah, packed up and left. Probably ran out of people to fool." The news didn't surprise me. Ryan had always struck me as the kind of guy who thrived on chaos. Once Emily's world fell apart, his interest likely faded. I didn't pity him. As for Emily, she moved out of town shortly after the divorce. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was staying with her sister, trying to piece her life back together. I didn't reach out. One night, as I sat on the porch with Jason, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he turned to me. "You've been quiet." "I'm thinking," I said. "About her?" "About me," I corrected. "About what's next." Jason nodded, letting the silence settle. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lifting. I wasn't just someone Emily had betrayed anymore. I was someone rebuilding, someone moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to take that next step.